My graduation ended with two commands. "Smile," my father whispered for the camera. "Don't you dare say a word," my stepmother hissed behind the gym, slapping me for refusing a job at their company. That night, I photographed the blooming bruise under my dorm room light and named the file Day 1. 3 years later, inside that same company, I pulled the pin on their perfect life. My name is Lena Voss. I am 24 years old. The air over the Westboro College football field was thick and heavy, the kind of early summer heat that promises thunderstorms but never delivers. It clung to the black polyester of my graduation gown, making the fabric stick to my skin. From the temporary stage, the dean's voice droned through the speakers, a list of names blurring into a single, monotonous sound. Below the stage, the wind, when it bothered to stir, carried the scent of freshly cut grass and the faint, sweet perfume of the hydrangeas planted along the track. It was a perfect picture of achievement, of American collegiate pride. When the speakers crackled my name, Lena Voss, summa cum laude, Bachelor of Science in Supply Chain Management, a polite ripple of applause came from the section where my family sat. I walked across the stage, my sensible heels sinking slightly into the turf. The dean shook my hand, his palm damp, his smile practiced. I accepted the leather-bound diploma holder, the culmination of 4 years of logistics charts, risk assessment models, and late-night study sessions fueled by vending machine coffee. Descending the steps, I found my father, Philip Voss, waiting for me. He was a man carved from New England granite and old money, his posture impeccable even in the sweltering heat. He adjusted his tie, a silk affair the color of a summer sky, and gently took my mortarboard, repositioning it on my head. "The tassel is on the wrong side, Lena," he said, his voice a low, familiar murmur meant only for me. He fixed it, his fingers brushing my hair with a touch that was more corrective than affectionate. A photographer materialized, a young man with a hopeful smile and a heavy camera. "Smile," my father commanded, his voice a whisper against my ear, the same tone he used to critique my posture at dinner parties or remind me to thank a host. He put his arm around my shoulders, a proprietary gesture that felt less like a hug and more like an assertion of ownership. I smiled. It was a good one, practiced and placid, the kind that wouldn't betray the knot tightening in my stomach. The camera flashed, capturing the image forever. Philip Voss, proud father, and his accomplished daughter. The perfect picture. The moment the photographer moved on, the smile dissolved from my face. My father's arm dropped. "Sarah wants to talk to you," he said, already looking past me, scanning the crowd for a business associate or a golf partner. "Behind North Hall. Don't be long." I nodded, the motion stiff. North Hall was the old gymnasium, a brick monolith squatting at the edge of the field. Its shadow offered the only real relief from the relentless sun. I handed him my diploma holder, the empty leather a stand-in for the real thing I'd collect later. My steps were measured as I skirted the dispersing crowd, my black gown a somber flag against the vibrant green. The sounds of celebration, laughter, shouted congratulations, the distant, brassy fanfare of the marching band practicing for their final number began to fade, replaced by the crunch of my heels on the gravel service path. The air behind the gym was cooler, smelling of damp brick and diesel from the idling delivery trucks near the loading dock. It was a place of function, not ceremony, hidden from the manicured public face of the campus. I saw her standing in the deep shade where the wall met a row of overgrown hedges. Sarah Keene, my stepmother, was a stark silhouette against the bright day. She was dressed in a severe white linen suit, her posture as rigid as my father's, her blonde hair pulled back in a chignon so tight it seemed to stretch the skin over her cheekbones. She didn't wait for me to reach her. She stepped out of the shadows, her heels clicking sharply on the asphalt, and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her fingers digging into the soft skin above my pulse point. She pulled me deeper into the corner, out of sight of the path. Well, she said. Her voice was low and stripped of the charming veneer she wore in public. Here, behind the gym, it was flat and hard. Well, what, Sarah? I asked, keeping my own voice even. I refused to let her see any weakness. The offer letter, she snapped, her eyes narrowing. The one from Larkspur Dynamics. It's been on your father's desk for a week, unsigned. Larkspur Dynamics, the family business, a mid-sized logistics and manufacturing firm that was, according to the local business journals, the patriotic, all-American backbone of Braeburn Falls. My father was the chairman of the board, a figurehead. Sarah was the CEO, the iron fist that had clawed its way up from the sales floor to the executive suite. The letter she was talking about wasn't an offer. It was a summons, a position as a nameless, undefined assistant, a role designed to keep me under her thumb, fetching coffee and filing papers, a visible but powerless accessory in the family enterprise. I told Dad I wanted to start an internal audit, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I want to learn the business from the ground up, the real business, supply chain, procurement, compliance. That's what my degree is in. A flicker of something, amusement, or maybe contempt, crossed her face. Internal audit, she repeated, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. You want to spend your days in a windowless room counting widgets and questioning freight invoices? Don't be naive. Lena, your place is where we can see you, where you learn to be a boss. That starts with loyalty. It starts with you doing as you're told. It's my career, I countered, trying to pull my wrist free. Her grip tightened. It's my company, she hissed, her face inches from mine. And you will sign the letter. You will be grateful for the opportunity we are giving you. No, I said. The word was small, but it felt immense, a boulder I'd finally pushed over a cliff. I want to be an auditor, if not at Larkspur, then somewhere else. I saw the shift in her eyes before I felt it. The cool calculation vanished, replaced by a flash of pure, unadulterated rage. Her hand moved in a blur. The slap was sharp, precise, and brutally efficient. It wasn't the clumsy, open-palmed strike of a momentary loss of control. It was a calculated impact, the kind meant to inflict pain and humiliation without leaving an obvious mark for too long. My head snapped to the side, my hair flying across my face. A metallic taste, sharp and salty, flooded my mouth. My cheekbone erupted in a starburst of fire. Through the brick wall of the gymnasium, I could hear the marching band, the triumphant, tinny sound of trumpets, and the steady beat of a snare drum leaked through the mortar, a surreal soundtrack to my silent degradation. I straightened my neck slowly, my eyes watering from the impact. I tasted the blood from my lip, a thin trickle on my tongue, and swallowed it down. I did not cry. I did not speak. I just stared back at her, letting the silence hang in the hot, still air. My phone, tucked deep into the ridiculously oversized pocket of my graduation gown, had been jostled during the confrontation. I'd been fumbling for it earlier, wanting to silence it before the ceremony began. In my haste, my thumb must have double-tapped the power button, activating the front-facing camera. It was recording now, not a clear video, but a chaotic, abstract film from the dark confines of my pocket. It captured the shuddering reflections of the overhead neon security light on the polyester fabric, the muffled, distorted sound of Sarah's voice, a venomous whisper without discernible words, and the sharp crack that echoed in the enclosed space. It was a recording of shadows and threats. Sarah smoothed the front of her white jacket, her composure instantly restored. The mask was back in place. She looked at me, a final, cold assessment. Think about your options, she said softly. There is the easy way, and there is the hard way. Just then, my father's voice cut through the stillness. Sarah, are you done with your girl talk yet? He appeared at the edge of the building, silhouetted against the bright field. He didn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on his wife. Sarah turned, a thin, polished smile spreading across her lips. It was a masterpiece of social grace, revealing nothing of the violence that had just occurred. "All done. Philip," she said, her voice light and musical, just giving Lena a little encouragement for her future. She walked toward him, taking his arm, and they turned back toward the celebration together, a portrait of familial solidarity. I remained in the shadows, my hand pressed against my throbbing cheek. I waited until their figures were small in the distance before I moved. I walked not back to the field, but away from it, toward the quiet solitude of the dorms. Most students had already moved out, their parents' cars packed to the roofs with mini fridges and laundry baskets. The halls were empty and echoed with my footsteps. Inside my small, bare room, I locked the door. The last of the afternoon sun slanted through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat on the edge of my stripped mattress and pulled the phone from my pocket. I stopped the recording and saved the file without watching it. Then, I opened the camera again. I turned it on myself. In the dim light, the mark was already beginning to show. A faint, angry redness was blooming on my left cheekbone, the promise of a deep, ugly bruise to come. I angled my face, letting the light catch the swelling. My expression was neutral. My eyes were dry. I took the picture, a high-resolution, damningly clear photograph. I created a new folder on my secure cloud drive. I typed in the name, Quiet Ledger. It was a term from my accounting classes, a secondary ledger, hidden from the main books, where secret or sensitive transactions are recorded. It felt right. I moved the photo into the folder. I moved the fragmented, shadowy video file in beside it. This was the first entry. I sat there for a long time as the sun set, painting the empty walls in shades of orange and purple. The sounds of celebration from the field had long since faded. I thought about the command to smile and the silent, bloody-mouthed obedience that followed. I thought about the years of quiet corrections, of being told to be grateful, to be loyal, to know my place. I had swallowed my words, kept the peace, and maintained the perfect picture for so long. Tonight, that ended. I looked at the faint reflection of my face on the dark screen of my phone. I made a promise to the girl with the blooming bruise, a vow as silent and absolute as the closing of a vault door. The next time they smiled, the next time the Voss family presented their perfect, polished faces to the world, it would be because they had no idea they were about to lose everything, and I would be the one to burn it all to the ground. 3 weeks after graduation, with the bruise on my cheek faded to a sickly yellow-green ghost I could cover with concealer, I drove my beat-up sedan to the Larkspur Dynamics corporate campus. To anyone in Braeburn Falls, it was a local landmark, a symbol of American prosperity. The local paper, the Braeburn Chronicle, ran a feature on the company at least twice a year, usually around the 4th of July or Veterans Day. The headlines were always some variation of the same theme. Larkspur Dynamics, a family's patriotic commitment to American industry. The articles featured glossy photos of my father, Philip Voss, standing on the factory floor, his hand resting on a piece of polished machinery, or of the whole family cutting the ribbon at a new community park funded by their largesse. Larkspur was a masterclass in public relations. It was the kind of company that sponsored Little League teams and had a massive American flag, visible from the interstate, waving from a dedicated flagpole on its manicured lawn. My father played his part perfectly. As chairman of the board, his role was largely ceremonial. He was the handsome, distinguished face of the company, the embodiment of its legacy. He gave speeches at Chamber of Commerce breakfasts and played golf with state senators. He was the living brand. The real power, the humming, ruthless engine of the corporation, was Sarah. She was the chief executive officer, a title she had earned with her teeth and nails. Her official biography, the one printed in the glossy annual reports, was a sanitized tale of grit and determination. It told of a brilliant young sales executive who caught the eye of the widowed chairman, and whose business acumen was so undeniable that she naturally ascended to the top spot. The unspoken truth was that Sarah had been my father's mistress while my mother was dying, and her ascent was a brutal, systematic purge of anyone who remembered that. She ran Larkspur with the same unyielding control she applied to our home. The corporate headquarters reflected this duality perfectly. The main lobby was a soaring atrium of glass and brushed steel, designed to inspire awe. The long, carpeted hallway leading to the executive suites was a gallery of corporate philanthropy. Framed photos lined the walls. Sarah handing an oversized check to the director of a children's hospital. My half-sister, Rena, reading to children at the Larkspur-funded library wing. My father smiling with a group of veterans at the annual company picnic. It was a visual symphony of benevolence. But I knew that if you took a detour to the second floor, to the hushed, sterile corridors of the Human Resources Department, you'd find a different story. It was a story told in the language of boilerplate contracts and ironclad non-disclosure agreements. It was whispered in the high turnover rate for executive assistants and the quiet, forced retirements of department heads who had been with the company for decades. Larkspur was a place of secrets, and HR was its vault. This was the world I grew up in, a house built on the foundation of a single, unbreakable rule. You do not argue. You do not show dissent. You do not air grievances. In front of anyone, the public face was everything. I remember one summer evening, I must have been about 12, at a backyard barbecue with some of my father's business partners. He'd made a joke at my expense, something about my quiet nature, calling me his little librarian. It was meant to be charming, but it felt dismissive, and I retorted with some sharp, preteen remark. Sarah's hand found my shoulder immediately, her perfectly manicured nails pressing into my skin just hard enough to be a warning. Later that night, in the quiet of our kitchen, she told me, her voice a cold, level whisper, "What you did tonight was embarrassing, not for you, but for your father. We are a family. Lena, we present a united front, always." Unity was just another word for obedience. Sarah's favorite word, however, was loyalty. She used it like a currency and a weapon. Loyalty was rewarded with generous Christmas bonuses and surprise promotions. A perceived lack of loyalty, however, was met with cold shoulders in meetings, projects that were designed to fail, and an eventual, inevitable parting of ways. Loyalty didn't mean dedication to the company's success. It meant unwavering, unquestioning allegiance to Sarah. The brightest star in Sarah's constellation of loyalty was my half-sister, Rena. At 22, Rena was the living, breathing embodiment of the Voss family brand. She was beautiful, bubbly, and endlessly photogenic. Her official title was Director of Community Outreach, which meant she was the public face of the Larkspur Hope Scholarship Foundation. The foundation was Sarah's pet project, a registered charity that promised to help underprivileged students from Braeburn Falls attend college. Rena's Instagram was a curated feed of her good deeds, posing with grateful scholarship recipients, packing Thanksgiving baskets for the needy, speaking at high school assemblies. She was the perfect daughter, the one who understood the assignment. The foundation was lauded in the press as another example of our family's commitment to the community. But during a summer internship in my sophomore year of college, I'd been tasked with digitizing some of the foundation's old expense reports. It was supposed to be mindless busy work, but even then, with only a basic understanding of accounting, I saw things that felt wrong. The filings were a mess. Scholarships were listed, but the corresponding documentation was often thin, and there were other expenses, large ones, filed under vague categories like promotional outreach and donor cultivation. I saw receipts for lavish dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, bills from luxury hotels in cities where Larkspur had no business, invoices for event photography that cost more than a full year's tuition. It looked less like a charity for poor students and more like a slush fund for executive perks. I didn't sign Sarah's letter. Instead, 2 weeks after graduation, I submitted a formal application through the Larkspur Dynamics online portal for the position of Junior Internal Auditor, Level 1, short-term contract. It was the lowest rung on the corporate ladder, a temporary position with no benefits, designed for recent graduates to get a few months of experience before being shown the door. It was so far beneath the station of a Voss that I knew it would be a strategic blind spot for Sarah. She wanted me as her assistant, a visible symbol of her control. She would never expect me to choose the windowless basement office of the audit department. My resume was too good to ignore without raising questions. Summa cum laude, a specialized degree perfectly suited for the role. Glowing recommendations from my professors. Rejecting me would look pointed. Personal. HR called me for an interview. I wore a conservative gray suit and answered their questions with practiced professionalism. I was offered the 6-month contract the next day. I accepted. My first day was a quiet affair. I was given a security badge, a laptop, and a cubicle in a fluorescent-lit corner of the ground floor, a space shared by 4 other junior auditors. My new boss, a weary-looking man named Mr. Davies, barely looked up from his computer when he shook my hand. The real introduction came at lunchtime. As I was heading to the cafeteria, I was intercepted by Sarah's assistant and summoned to the executive floor. I found Sarah, my father, and Rena waiting for me by the elevators. Sarah smiled, a brilliant, blindingly white expression of maternal pride. "Lena, darling, I was just telling everyone the good news." She turned to a group of senior vice presidents who were also waiting for an elevator. "This is my daughter, Lena," she announced, her voice resonating with warmth. "She's just graduated from Westboro, top of her class. She insisted on starting at the bottom to really learn the ropes. No special treatment for her. She's our new probationary daughter." She laughed, a light, tinkling sound. "Just kidding. She's a junior auditor. We're so proud of her initiative." The executives all smiled and murmured their congratulations. I felt their eyes on me, a mixture of curiosity and pity. The probationary daughter. The joke landed exactly as she intended, marking me as a temporary amusement, a child playing dress-up in the world of adults. I smiled back, the same placid, empty smile from graduation day. "I'm excited to learn from the best," I said, my voice clear and steady. I met Sarah's gaze. "Thank you for the opportunity." The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. We all stepped in. My father, Sarah, Rena, and I, along with 2 of the VPs. It was one of the glass elevators that overlooked the atrium, a moving stage for all to see. As the doors slid shut, sealing us in the mirrored box, their masks dropped into place. My father began talking loudly about a golf tournament. Rena laughed, a bright, carefree sound, as she showed him something on her phone. Sarah joined in, her voice blending with theirs in a performance of effortless family harmony. Their laughter filled the small space, bouncing off the glass and steel, loud and artificial. They were a perfect family in a perfect company. I stood in the corner, silent, my new security badge feeling heavy against my chest. I watched their reflections in the polished steel doors, 3 smiling faces, perfectly aligned, and mine, in the background, watching, listening, and recording it all in the quiet ledger of my mind. The elevator ascended, and their laughter grew louder, a sound meant to be heard. It was the first and most important layer of the entire illusion. The audit department at Larkspur Dynamics was a world away from the sunlit atrium and the executive gallery. It was a place of beige cubicles, humming servers, and the perpetual low-grade headache that comes from staring at spreadsheets under fluorescent lights for 9 hours a day. No one important ever came down here. I was invisible, a temporary contractor in a department full of people trained to be overlooked. It was the perfect place to learn how to listen. For the first month, I did exactly what was expected of me. I was diligent, quiet, and efficient. I reconciled accounts, flagged minor expense report violations, and learned the intricate, labyrinthine architecture of Larkspur's enterprise resource planning software. I became fluent in the silent language of the company, a language written in data, not words. I learned to read the stories hidden in warehouse inventory logs, where a pallet of high-value electronics might be marked as damaged and disposed of. with no corresponding insurance claim. I discovered the art of the phantom purchase order, a ghost in the machine created to balance a budget for materials that were never ordered and never received. My specialty became fixed assets. I volunteered to help with the annual equipment audit, a tedious task no one else wanted. I spent weeks in the system, cross-referencing the serial numbers of everything from company vehicles to industrial CNC machines, and there, in the digital noise, I found a quiet, consistent pattern. A brand new piece of manufacturing equipment, worth $250,000, would be logged in the system with a serial number. Its depreciation would be dutifully calculated, but its physical location would be listed as our main facility in Braeburn Falls, while its maintenance records originated from a third-party service company near a port in Savannah. The equipment wasn't in two places at once. The serial number had been shuffled. A new, expensive machine had been purchased on paper, its value added to the company's assets, while an older, fully depreciated machine sat on our factory floor, its serial number plate discreetly swapped. It was a clean, simple way to inflate the company's net worth. My work was a process of layering maps. I started with the company's official shipping and logistics charts, mapping out the routes our trucks and third-party carriers took across the country. The data was mostly routine, a spiderweb of efficiency connecting our warehouses to our clients. But there were strange anomalies, what the logistics managers called blind spots. These were periods where GPS tracking on a truck would inexplicably cut out for several hours, or delivery confirmation scans were logged manually, long after the scheduled drop-off time. On their own, they were minor operational hiccups. Then I created my second map, using public social media posts and the Larkspur Hope Foundation's own promotional calendar. I mapped every single one of Rena's community outreach trips over the past 3 years. I plotted her fundraisers in Scottsdale, her charity galas in Miami, her fact-finding missions in Las Vegas. When I laid one map over the other, the pattern that emerged was stark and undeniable. The logistical blind spots, the missing hours, the delayed scans, the rerouted trucks, coincided perfectly with the dates and locations of the Foundation's promotional tours. It was as if our corporate supply chain had a habit of developing temporary black holes in the exact same upscale zip codes my sister was visiting. A more direct link appeared on a Tuesday afternoon while I was auditing the quarterly travel and expense reports for the senior sales team. It was mind-numbing work, checking receipts for rental cars and client dinners. Tucked into one manager's report was a charge for a 4-night stay at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami Beach. The justification was listed as Annual Sales Strategy Conference, but I knew Larkspur hadn't held a conference in Miami that year. The receipt was from February. Out of instinct, I opened Rena's public Instagram profile and scrolled back. There it was. A photo of her, dated from the same week in February, clinking champagne glasses on a balcony overlooking the ocean. The geotag read, Miami Beach, FL. The caption, so blessed to be doing the good work of the Larkspur Hope Foundation. Making a difference. Larkspur Hope. The hotel bill was for a sales manager, but the expense was for my sister. A charity's promotional tour was being secretly underwritten by the corporate travel budget. The digital world gave me the blueprint, but I knew the real fraud was physical, happening in the tangible world of pallets, trucks, and shipping containers. The executives and managers in the corporate office were too polished, too careful. The truth, I suspected, was with the people who were actually moving the boxes, the ones whose hands got dirty. I started taking my coffee breaks in the dispatch office and eating my lunch in the cafeteria frequented by the warehouse staff and truck drivers. I didn't ask questions, I just listened. I learned about their shifts, their kids, their frustrations with management. I became a familiar, harmless presence. The break came from a driver named Sal, a man with 20 years on the road and a permanent distrust of anyone in a clean shirt. One afternoon, nursing a cup of coffee, he was complaining about a new policy that penalized drivers for late deliveries. "It's garbage," he grumbled, mostly to himself. "They want us to make up time, but half these loads aren't even sealed right when we get them. Last week, at Maple Yard, I picked up a container headed for the port. Seal was already on the door, but it was loose. Looked like it had been popped and put back on. I noted it on my check sheet, but the foreman just tells me to sign the bill of lading as is. Says it was inspected. Yeah, right. The manifest says sealed at origin, but that thing was open before it ever left the damn yard. Maple Yard. It was our largest and most chaotic distribution center. Located on the industrial outskirts of town. Sal's words were the key. A broken seal meant someone had access to the cargo between the warehouse and the truck. It meant the shipping manifest, the legally binding document that declared the contents of the shipment, could be a lie. The next morning, I went to my boss, Mr. Davies. I told him that during my fixed asset review, I'd noted some inventory reconciliation issues originating from Maple Yard. There are some discrepancies in the cycle counts for high-value goods, I said, using the correct, sterile terminology. I think a surprise physical inventory count is warranted, just to tighten up the controls. Davies sighed, polishing his glasses on his tie. He hated surprises. They meant more work. Isn't that a bit extreme, Voss? The numbers aren't that far off. It's best practice, I said calmly, and I'm happy to lead it myself. I can be there at 5 a.m. tomorrow to audit the night shift's outgoing shipments. The early start time was the clincher. It meant he wouldn't have to go. Fine, he mumbled. Just don't make waves. All right? Keep it low-key. The next morning, the air in the Maple Yard warehouse was cold and smelled of diesel exhaust and damp cardboard. The vast space was a canyon of steel shelving, filled with the roar and beep of moving forklifts. The night shift supervisor, a heavy-set man named Hank, gave me a wary look when I presented my audit authorization. 5 a.m. is a hell of a time to count boxes, he said. That's why they call it a surprise, I replied with a small smile. I went straight to the loading bay Sal had mentioned. As I reviewed the night's shipping logs, I pointed to the security camera mounted high on the wall above the bay doors. I'll need the footage from this camera for the last 12 hours, I said. Hank chewed on a toothpick. That one's been acting up, flickering. Maintenance is supposed to look at it today. Of course it was. A camera can be broken, a logbook can be falsified, but a 50-ton industrial floor scale, the kind embedded in the concrete that weighs trucks as they are loaded, doesn't know how to lie. Every pallet loaded onto a truck has to cross it, and its digital logs are stored on a separate, isolated server. I spent the next hour observing, clipboard in hand, as the last of the night's trucks were loaded. Then I went to the supervisor's office and requested a raw data export from the scale system for the past 72 hours. It gave me a list of every single weight recorded, time-stamped to the second, back in my cubicle. I spent the rest of the day meticulously cross-referencing the scale's actual, recorded weights with the declared weights on the official bills of lading. And there it was, a consistent, methodical discrepancy. For shipments going to a specific third-party distributor near the port in Savannah, the declared weights were always higher than the actual weights. The difference wasn't huge, just under 2% on average, but it was constant. 2% of a 50,000-pound shipment is 1,000 pounds. 1,000 pounds of high-end electronics replaced by something cheaper and heavier to make the weight, or simply removed. The manifest falsified. It was a river of stolen product flowing silently out of the company. I wrote up my initial findings in a formal, dispassionate report, complete with the raw data from the scale and copies of the falsified manifests. I highlighted the discrepancy and recommended a full-scale audit of the entire facility and the third-party distributor. I submitted it to Mr. Davies. He called me into his office an hour later, closing the door behind me. He looked pale. The report was on his desk, untouched. "Lena," he said, his voice low, "this is good work, very thorough, but a 2% variance. It could be a calibration issue, a clerical error. It's not the kind of thing we need to escalate and make a big deal out of. Let's just note it in the file and move on. Don't make waves." I looked him in the eye. He was afraid. "Understood, Mr. Davies," I said. Would you like me to add your official recommendation to the report's addendum? The color drained from his face. Is that necessary? It's standard procedure to document all supervisory directives concerning audit findings, I replied, my voice perfectly neutral. I went back to my desk and added a new section to my report. Addendum A, Supervisory Review. I quoted him verbatim. Per department head, David Davies. This finding does not warrant escalation. Directive is to note it in the file and move on. No further action is recommended at this time. I saved the document. His fear was now a piece of evidence. That night, I went online and bought a micro recorder. It was the size of a shirt button, with a pinhole microphone and a 50-hour battery life. When it arrived 2 days later, I used a tiny drop of superglue to affix it inside the plastic holder for my ID badge, right behind my own smiling, compliant face. The digital trail was growing. The paper trail was damning. Now, I needed to hear the lies with my own ears. I wasn't ready to report anything yet. I was still in the quiet phase. I was accumulating. The quarterly product review meeting was held in the main conference room on the 27th floor. It was a fishbowl, a box of glass and steel suspended in the sky, with a panoramic view of Braeburn Falls below. The room was designed to project an image of absolute transparency and power. It was also, I knew, a place where professional executions were carried out in broad daylight. I sat at the long, polished mahogany table, my laptop open, my ID badge hanging from its lanyard around my neck. The tiny recorder, nestled behind my picture, was a silent, steady presence, its single red light blinking once as I activated it. My turn came after the head of sales presented a series of optimistic but unsubstantiated projections. My name was on the agenda. Lena Voss, Junior Auditor, Q2, Supply Chain. Risk Assessment. Mr. Davies had tried to talk me out of it, begging me not to present my Maple Yard findings to the executive committee. I had insisted, framing it as a necessary part of my contractual duties. He had finally relented, looking sick with worry. I walked to the podium, my heels making no sound on the thick charcoal gray carpet. I connected my laptop to the projector, and my first slide appeared on the massive screen behind me. It was a clean, professional chart titled Logistical Discrepancies and Mitigation Strategies. "Good morning," I began, my voice even and clear, resonating slightly in the quiet room. My audit of the Q2 shipping manifests has revealed several persistent anomalies, specifically related to outbound logistics from the Maple Yard Distribution Center. I clicked to the next slide, which showed a graph illustrating the 2% weight variance I had discovered. As you can see, there is a consistent, albeit minor, discrepancy between recorded scale weights and declared weights on bills of lading for a specific freight corridor. While this could be attributed to clerical error or equipment miscalibration, its consistency warrants further investigation to mitigate potential inventory loss and ensure compliance. I saw Sarah shift in her seat at the head of the table. Her expression was placid, but a muscle in her jaw was tight. My father, seated at her right hand, was studying a water stain on his coaster, his face a carefully blank mask. "My preliminary recommendation," I continued, moving to my final slide, "is to commission a comprehensive third-party external audit of Maple Yard's inventory controls and shipping procedures. This would provide an unbiased assessment and protect the company from any potential liability." Before I could say another word, Sarah picked up the master remote from the table. "Thank you, Lena. That's very diligent of you." Her voice was syrupy sweet, but it had a steel edge that cut through the air. The screen behind me flickered. My chart of logistical data vanished. In its place, an image filled the screen, 10 feet high. A photo of me on my graduation day, smiling blankly into the camera, my father's hand on my shoulder. A low murmur went through the room. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. Sarah stood up, gesturing to the photo with an elegant sweep of her hand. "As you can see," she said, addressing the room with the indulgent smile of a proud mother, "my daughter is very bright, top of her class, But she's still young. She looked directly at me, her eyes glittering with malice. She has a passion for making things look dramatic, for showing off. It's admirable, in a way, but a 2% variance? An external audit? It's a bit much, don't you think? She's trying to make a big impression. That's all. A wave of sycophantic laughter rippled through the room. The vice presidents, the department heads, they all laughed. It wasn't a genuine, amused laugh. It was a calculated, political sound, the sound of people agreeing with the one in power. I stood at the podium, frozen, the giant image of my own forced smile mocking me from the screen. My data, my professionalism, my entire career was erased in an instant, dismissed as childish theatrics. I looked at my father. He refused to meet my eyes. He tapped his pen twice on the mahogany table, a sharp, resonant sound that cut through the laughter. "Sarah is right," he said, his voice quiet but firm, carrying the weight of his authority as chairman. "This is an internal matter. Let's keep the peace in the family. Shall we?" Keep the peace. In our family. That meant, shut up. He had just publicly declared me a problem to be managed, not a professional to be heard. The humiliation was absolute, a physical weight pressing down on me. Across the room, I saw my half-sister, Rena. She hadn't been paying attention to my presentation, but she was fully engaged now. She had her phone held up, not recording me, but herself. She was live streaming, a small beatific smile on her face as she captured the scene for her followers. On the screen of her phone, I could see little animated hearts floating up the side of the image. The caption she was probably typing flashed in my mind. At a board meeting with my amazing family, so proud of the work they do, family, business, power, family. She was packaging my public degradation as aspirational content. My hands were shaking, but I forced them still. I disconnected my laptop from the projector cable. I gathered my notes with deliberate, measured movements. I looked up, not at Sarah, not at my father, but at the small, black dome of the security camera mounted in the ceiling. I held its gaze for a long moment. Then I turned back to the room. "Thank you for the feedback," I said, my voice betraying no emotion. "It's been noted." I walked back to my seat, my back straight, feeling the burn of 20 pairs of eyes on me. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. I left the room immediately. Heading for the elevators, I didn't get far. Sarah's hand clamped down on my arm, her fingers digging into my bicep as she pulled me into an empty glass-walled corridor overlooking the city. We were visible to anyone who walked by, but the soundproofing was absolute. She leaned in close, her expensive perfume cloying and suffocating. Her voice was a venomous whisper, for my ears only, but I knew the tiny microphone on my badge was catching every word. "Let me be perfectly clear," she hissed. "You are a guest in this company. You are a guest in this family. You have nothing. Your name, your education, the very clothes you are wearing. It all comes from your father and me. Do you understand? Without me, you are nothing." I didn't pull away. I didn't flinch. I just looked at her, at the raw, undisguised hatred in her eyes. I let the silence stretch for a beat, letting the recorder soak in her words. "Thank you," I said softly, my voice barely a whisper. "Thank you for the confirmation." Her face contorted in a brief flash of confusion and rage. My response wasn't what she expected. I hadn't cried or fought back. I had treated her threat like a data point. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the glass hallway. The official notification arrived in my inbox at 4:52 p.m. It was a sterile, HR-formatted email with the subject line, "Official reassignment." It informed me that, effective immediately, my contract as a junior internal auditor was being terminated. However, in recognition of my familial relationship with the company, I was being offered a new 6-month contract as an on-site logistics coordinator. My new office would be at the Maple Yard Distribution Center. It was an exile, a punishment designed to be both a humiliation and a warning. They were sending me to the very place I had tried to expose, burying me in the heart of the problem. That night, in my small apartment, I didn't sleep. I sat in front of my personal computer, the glow of the monitor painting my face in the dark. I opened the secure folder on my cloud drive, the one named Quiet Ledger. It contained everything: the photo of my bruised face, the distorted video from behind the gym, the annotated expense reports from the foundation, my full analysis of the Maple Yard weight discrepancies, the audio file of Mr. Davies telling me to make waves, and now, the crown jewel, a crystal-clear audio recording of the CEO of Larkspur Dynamics threatening me in a glass hallway. The time for quiet collection was over. The ledger was complete. With a click, I renamed the folder. Its new name was Bright Noon. The name felt right. It was a promise of harsh, unforgiving light, a promise of a reckoning that would happen not in the shadows, but in the open, for all to see. My final act of the night was to ensure the data was safe. I encrypted the entire Bright Noon folder into a single, password-protected file. Then I took a new, high-capacity external hard drive from its packaging. I plugged it in and copied the encrypted file onto it. I ejected the drive and walked into my kitchen. I opened my lunchbox for the next day. A simple, insulated bag. I placed the hard drive at the bottom, underneath a plastic container of leftover pasta. It was the most valuable thing I owned, a weapon of mass destruction hidden in the most mundane object imaginable. Tomorrow morning, I would walk it right out the front door. My exile began at 4 o'clock in the morning. The air inside the Maple Yard warehouse was colder than the pre-dawn darkness outside, and it carried a metallic tang that coated the back of my tongue. It was a layered scent of machine oil, ozone from the charging forklifts, and the fine, gritty dust of wood pulp from thousands of cardboard boxes. My new office was a cramped, glass-walled cube on a mezzanine overlooking the loading docks, a fishbowl with a view of hell. Sarah had meant it as a prison, a place to isolate and break me. But from my perch, I could see everything. I could see the entire circulatory system of her corruption, and I was now the one with the clipboard, tasked with monitoring the flow. The night shift supervisor, Hank, the same man who told me the camera was broken, seemed to accept my presence with a grudging respect. I was no longer an auditor from corporate. I was one of them, banished to the land of steel-toed boots and 4 a.m. starts. He brought me a cup of sludgy coffee on my first morning. "Don't know what you did to piss off the queen bee," he grumbled, leaning against the doorframe of my office. "But welcome to the club." He gestured with his chin toward the cavernous space below. "Just keep your head down and stay away from the circus at Bay 3. It'll make your life easier." "The circus?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. "Yeah, management's pet projects. Test products. They call them special shipments. More paperwork than they're worth, and they always go out through Bay 3. Bay 3, the one with the conveniently malfunctioning camera. Hank had just given me my starting point. For the next 2 weeks, I did my job as a logistics coordinator, and I did it well. I optimized truck routes, streamlined pallet stacking protocols, and reduced loading times by 6%. I made myself useful. I made myself a part of the machinery, and whenever I had a spare moment, I watched Bay 3. The shipments Hank mentioned were exactly as he described: frequent, always handled by the same small crew, and shrouded in a mountain of priority paperwork. One morning, I used my new authority to spot-check one of these pallets before it was loaded. It was shrink-wrapped and bound, destined for a technology recycling center. The crew grumbled but couldn't refuse a direct order from their coordinator. Armed with a box cutter and a digital scale, I went to work. The manifest listed the contents as assorted deprecated circuit boards and components. The weight was logged at precisely 1,500 pounds. As I sliced through the plastic wrap, I noticed something odd about the main shipping label. It was thick, and the corner was slightly peeled. I slipped the edge of my blade beneath it. It came away easily, revealing another, identical label underneath, the same recipient, the same declared contents. But the sender's address was different. The top label listed Larkspur Dynamics. The one underneath listed one of our major corporate clients. I dug deeper into the boxes. They were filled with old circuit boards, as advertised, but they weren't random. They were all identical, high-end server motherboards, the kind used in data centers. They were obsolete, but not worthless. They contained trace amounts of gold, platinum, and other precious metals that a specialized recycling firm would pay handsomely for. I took the pallet to the industrial scale. Its actual weight was 1,612 pounds, over 100 pounds heavier than the manifest. The boxes were weighted down with scrap metal hidden at the bottom. Back in my office, the pieces began to click into place. I pulled the client's file. 6 months ago, they had upgraded their entire data center. They had returned thousands of these exact motherboards to us as part of a trade-in agreement. In our system, the transaction should have appeared as a credit to the client's account, but it wasn't there. I spent the next 2 days digging through Larkspur's labyrinthine accounting servers. I finally found the transaction, buried in a subledger for interdepartmental asset transfers. The returned motherboards, a physical asset with a clear market value, had never been logged as company inventory. Instead, the paperwork showed their value had been converted. An internal memo, authorized by Sarah, redirected the estimated scrap value of the electronics, a figure close to $500,000, as a non-cash charitable contribution, a tax-deductible donation made directly to the Larkspur Hope Scholarship Foundation. It was a brilliant, elegant piece of fraud. They were taking a client's returned goods, a taxable asset, and instead of processing it legally, they were donating its ghost value to their own sham charity. Larkspur got a massive tax write-off, and the foundation got a $500,000 infusion of clean, untraceable capital on its books, all without a single dollar ever changing hands. The physical boards, now officially worthless donations, were then shipped out through Bay 3 to be sold for cash off the books. The linchpin was the internal memo authorizing the purpose conversion. It was a simple, one-page document, but at the bottom, glowing in digital blue, was Sarah's electronic signature. This was the direct link I needed, the proof that this wasn't just a local warehouse scam, but a directive from the CEO herself. But a digital signature, even one as secure as Sarah's, was not infallible. I opened the signature's properties. Buried in the metadata was a digital certificate, a string of code that contained information about when and how the signature was created. It included a precise timestamp, 8:47 p.m., on a Saturday night 2 months prior, and it included the unique identifier of the device used to authorize it, a physical USB security token, one of only 2 assigned to the CEO. To sign the document, someone had to physically have that token plugged into their computer. I opened a web browser and searched the archives of the Braeburn Chronicle. I found what I was looking for in the society pages. On that exact Saturday night, at exactly 8:47 p.m., Sarah Keene was on stage at the annual Braeburn Arts Gala, accepting an award for her philanthropy. There were photos of her at the podium, holding a glass statue. She was miles away from her office, and I knew from her obsessive personal security protocols that she never took her laptop or security tokens to public events. She couldn't have signed it. So who did? Who had the token? The answer was simple. Sarah's executive assistant, a woman named Caroline Paris, was always with her. She was in the background of half the photos from the gala, holding Sarah's clutch, a silent shadow. I dove back into the company's internal directory and looked up Caroline's profile. Her primary role was listed as executive assistant to the CEO, but she had a secondary, official role as well. She was the registered treasurer of the Larkspur Hope Scholarship Foundation. Caroline had the means, the physical token, and she was the financial officer of the very foundation benefiting from the fraud. Sarah gave the orders, and Caroline executed them, a loyal soldier forging her queen's signature. I now had the entire scheme mapped out, a perfect chain of digital and financial evidence, but I wanted more. I wanted to see it. I went back to the issue of the broken camera at Bay 3. It was a dead end. But as I sat in my fishbowl office, looking out over the sprawling industrial park, I saw the morning traffic starting to build on the main road outside the complex. And on the corner, blinking from green to yellow to red, was a traffic light. Mounted on top of it was a small gray dome, a city-operated surveillance camera. From its vantage point, it couldn't see Bay 3, but it had a clear, unobstructed view of the auxiliary exit gate at the back of the Maple Yard property, the one used by truckers looking to bypass the way station at the main entrance. That afternoon, I logged on to the Braeburn City Government's public data portal. I filled out a request for municipal records, a dry, bureaucratic form. I requested 72 hours of video footage from the traffic camera, citing a perfectly plausible, mind-numbingly boring reason: to conduct a time flow analysis of carrier traffic at the Maple Yard auxiliary gate for the purposes of optimizing shipment scheduling. No one would ever question it. A week later, a link to a downloadable video file appeared in my inbox. The footage was grainy, shot from a distance, and distorted by heat haze rising from the asphalt. I spent hours watching the time-lapsed recording, my eyes sore from staring at the screen. I watched trucks come and go, a monotonous parade of commerce, and then I found it. At 3:17 a.m., on a Tuesday, a semi-truck from a preferred local carrier, the same one Sal had mentioned, a company with a reputation for looking the other way, is seen leaving the auxiliary gate. It doesn't stop. It doesn't log out. It just exits. According to the official Larkspur shipping logs for that morning, that same truck's manifest wasn't scanned into the system until 4:30 a.m., over an hour later, at the main gate. The truck had left the property long before it was officially recorded as being there. I zoomed in on the grainy image. The light from a street lamp briefly illuminated the side of the truck's trailer. The resolution was terrible, but for two perfect, damning frames, I could make out the cargo visible through the open back door. It wasn't deprecated circuit boards. It was a pallet of shrink-wrapped boxes bearing the logo of a high-end audio equipment manufacturer. A new product, not a return. The truck that was officially supposed to be carrying scrap was secretly carrying 1,000 pounds of premium, untaxed, off-the-books merchandise into the pre-dawn darkness. I saved the two frames. The crack in the facade of Maple Yard had split wide open, and I was standing right in the middle of it, holding the evidence in my hand. The transition from accumulating evidence to weaponizing it required a different kind of expertise. My knowledge was in logistics and numbers. I needed someone whose currency was risk, precedent, and the precise, unforgiving language of the law. I found him through a pro bono legal clinic's referral service, a name on a short, vetted list of specialists. His name was Arthur Vance, and his specialty was state and federal whistleblower protection law. Our first meeting was not in a wood-paneled office, but in a small, independent coffee shop overlooking the river that cut through the old part of Braeburn Falls. It was a place with mismatched furniture and the constant hiss of an espresso machine, anonymous and filled with the low hum of conversations that would be forgotten the moment they ended. Arthur Vance was a man who seemed to blend into the background. He was in his late 50s, with graying hair, a rumpled tweed jacket, and the patient, watchful eyes of a chess master. He didn't look like a litigator. He looked like a history professor. I didn't bring my laptop. I brought a single, unassuming flash drive, the one I'd copied from the hard drive in my lunchbox. I laid it on the table between our coffee cups. "This is everything," I said. For the next 2 hours, he listened. I spoke in a low, even tone, narrating the contents of the drive as if I were presenting an audit report. I walked him through the layered shipping labels, the 2% weight discrepancy, the ghost donation to the Larkspur Hope Foundation, the forged electronic signature on the memo, the timestamp from the gala, and the grainy frames from the city traffic camera. I told him about the public humiliation in the glass boardroom and the threat in the hallway. When I finished, I slid a pair of earbuds across the table. He put them in, and I played him the audio file from my ID badge. His expression never changed, but I saw his focus sharpen as he listened to Sarah's voice, a venomous whisper now captured and contained in a digital file. When the recording ended, he took the earbuds out and sat in silence for a long minute, watching the slow current of the river outside the window. "The legal term for a body of evidence like this," he finally said, his voice as quiet as mine had been, "is an unbroken chain. You have motive, means, opportunity, and a clear pattern of concealment. Most importantly, you have direct, verifiable proof of malfeasance originating from the highest level of the corporate structure." He tapped the flash drive with his finger. "This isn't just a whistleblower case, Ms. Voss. This is a prosecutorial slam dunk." He outlined the conditions for state whistleblower protection. I had to demonstrate a good faith belief that a crime was being committed. I had to have evidence that wasn't obtained through illegal means, and I had to report it through the proper channels. "You've met all the criteria," he confirmed. "The audio recording of your CEO is the most delicate piece. However, our state is a one-party consent state, and given that her words constituted a direct threat related to your employment, we can make a strong case for its admissibility. To be safe, however, we should formalize your ability to record." The next day, following his precise instructions, I filed a formal complaint with the local magistrate, citing a hostile work environment and verbal intimidation. I included a heavily redacted transcript of Sarah's threat. The magistrate issued a temporary restraining order against Sarah, which I did not serve. But more importantly, the order came with a provision legally granting me the right to record any future interactions with her that I perceived as threatening. The audio file I already possessed was now retroactively shielded. It was a clean, legal masterstroke. With Arthur's guidance, we began to methodically dismantle the scholarship foundation. I had already done the initial data crunching, but he showed me how to frame it for a federal prosecutor. We created a flowchart that was as brutal as it was simple. It started with the donated assets from the Mapleyard fraud and ended with itemized credit card statements from Caroline Paris, the foundation's treasurer and Sarah's assistant. Donor cultivation events in Scottsdale corresponded perfectly with spa weekends. Promotional outreach in Miami matched receipts from designer boutiques. The Larkspur Hope Foundation wasn't a charity. It was a tax-exempt laundering mechanism for Sarah's personal slush fund. The time had come to light the first fires. We prepared two separate, meticulously documented packages. The first was a comprehensive report on the Foundation's financial irregularities and the corporate tax fraud scheme. It was addressed to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. The second package was different. It detailed a pattern of workplace intimidation. Citing my demotion and Sarah's threat, I also included sworn, anonymous affidavits I had collected from two night shift workers at Mapleyard, detailing how they were routinely forced to work off the clock to meet the deadlines for the special shipments from Bay 3. This package was addressed to the State Department of Labor. We sent them via registered mail on the same day. Two different government agencies, a federal one and a state one, were now in possession of two different sets of allegations. They would launch their own independent investigations, a two-pronged assault that Larkspur would not see coming from a single source. With the legal mechanisms in motion, I turned my attention to the corporate structure. I opened my calendar and went forward 3 months, to the date that was seared into my memory, the 3rd anniversary of my graduation from Westboro College. I created a new, all-day event. I gave it a simple, 2-word title, Bright Noon. It was a placeholder, a digital flag marking the day the bill would come due. My demotion to Mapleyard came with a significant pay cut, but I had been saving money my entire life, living frugally, hoarding it away without a clear purpose. Now I had one. Larkspur, like many companies, had an employee stock option plan. Long-serving employees were granted options to buy company stock at a fixed price, but at a company run by Sarah, morale among the veterans was low. Many of them, feeling undervalued and seeing no future, often let their options expire worthless or were preparing to quit, forfeiting their grants. Working through a discreet third-party broker Arthur recommended, I began to quietly buy those options. I found employees who were nearing retirement or had already been pushed out, and I offered them cash for their soon-to-expire options. Options the company assumed would never be exercised. It was a pittance to them, but a fortune to me. I drained my savings. converting years of quiet accumulation into a small but tangible stake in my enemy's empire. I wasn't a Voss by their definition, but I was about to become a shareholder. With my small block of shares secured, I identified 3 other minor shareholders. They were men in their 60s who had worked at Larkspur since before my father even met Sarah. They had been department heads, respected managers who had been demoted or pushed into consulting roles to make way for Sarah's loyalists. They held small, legacy stakes in the company, not enough to have any real power, but enough to feel a sense of ownership. I didn't call them. I sent them each a plain, anonymous envelope containing a single sheet of paper with a time and a location. The far end of the public park parking lot. Tuesday, at dusk. When they arrived, each in their own car, parking a few spaces apart, I got out of mine and approached them. There, under the buzzing orange glow of a single street lamp, I gave my presentation. It wasn't an emotional appeal. It was a cold, hard risk assessment. I didn't show them all my evidence, just enough. I showed them the memo with the forged signature and the timestamp from the gala. I showed them the summary of the foundation's fraudulent finances. Sarah Keene's actions have exposed Larkspur Dynamics to federal tax fraud and embezzlement charges, I said, my voice flat and clinical. When this becomes public, there will be federal seizures, shareholder lawsuits, and a collapse in the company's value. Your shares, the ones you worked 40 years for, will be worthless. I let the words hang in the cold night air. I am calling for an emergency shareholders meeting to propose a vote of no confidence and a motion to remove her as CEO, pending the results of an internal investigation. I don't have enough votes on my own. I need your proxies. They were silent for a long time. These were cautious men who had survived by keeping their heads down. Finally, the oldest of them, a former head of engineering named George, looked at me. "She'll destroy you, kid." "She's going to destroy the company," I countered. "I'm just offering a way to save the pieces." It took another 10 minutes of tense, quiet discussion, but by the time we left the parking lot, I had their signed proxy agreements in my briefcase. My small voting block had just become significant. Back at Mapleyard, I became the perfect defeated employee. I was punctual, efficient, and silent. I kept my head down. I filed my reports on time. I optimized. I coordinated. I let Hank and the others believe that the girl from corporate had been put in her place, that the fight had been knocked out of her. Sarah and my father received weekly reports on my performance. I made sure they were glowing. I wanted them to think they had won. I wanted them to forget I even existed. The quiet was my camouflage, the silence my greatest weapon. They thought I was buried. They had no idea I was planting seeds. The summons came at the end of my shift, the day before the 3rd anniversary of my graduation. It wasn't my father who called. It was his executive assistant, a woman with a voice as smooth and sterile as the marble floors on the 27th floor. "Mr. Voss requests your presence in his office at 6 o'clock this evening," she'd said, her tone making it clear that this was not a request. I drove from the grime and noise of Mapleyard back to the silent, gleaming tower of the corporate headquarters. I used my badge to access the executive elevator, the one that required a special clearance. The ride up was silent, a smooth, soundless ascent from the engine room of the company to its command deck. His office was at the end of the hall, a sanctuary of old money and established power. The door was thick, solid walnut, and it opened into a room that always felt like a different century. The air was cool and still, scented with leather-bound books he never read, the expensive wood polish his cleaning staff used, and the lingering, ghostly aroma of a celebratory cigar. It was a room designed to intimidate, to remind visitors of the weight of the Voss legacy. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city lights beginning to glitter in the twilight. He didn't turn when I entered. "Close the door, Lena," he said, his voice a low rumble that was absorbed by the thick carpet and heavy drapes. I closed the door, the latch clicking shut with a heavy, final sound. He turned then, his face half in shadow. He looked older than he had 3 months ago. the lines around his eyes deeper. He gestured with his chin toward the wall opposite his desk. "You remember that photograph?" he said. It wasn't a question. Hanging on the wall, in a heavy ornate silver frame, was the official family portrait, taken the Christmas after he married Sarah. He stood in the center, tall and solid. Sarah was beside him, her hand resting on his arm, her smile brilliant and possessive. Rena, a teenager at the time, was on his other side, looking adoringly at the camera. And then there was me, standing slightly apart, a bookish, awkward girl with a polite, vacant smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. We were the perfect picture of a blended, successful American family, a beautiful, expensive lie. "Tomorrow is the emergency shareholders meeting you called," he continued, walking slowly toward his massive desk. He didn't sit. He leaned against it, crossing his arms, creating a barrier between us. "I've seen the agenda, the motion you've put forward." He paused, his eyes finally meeting mine. They were tired. "I want you to withdraw it. Don't make a scene. Lena, think of the company's reputation. Think of the family. We need to maintain a sense of peace." Peace, the word he used when he meant silence. Harmony, the word he used when he meant obedience. For years, I had paid for his peace with my own. I didn't answer him. Instead, I walked to the desk, my footsteps silent on the rug. I took my phone from my pocket, unlocked it with my thumb, and opened a single image. I placed the phone face up on the polished expanse of his desk, directly in his line of sight. The screen glowed, a small, harsh rectangle of light in the dim office. The photograph was the first entry in my quiet ledger, taken 3 years ago to the day. The image of my own face, my cheekbones swollen and blooming with the ugly purple red of a fresh bruise under the fluorescent light of my empty dorm room. He looked down. I watched his face. It wasn't a dramatic reaction. It was a quiet, internal collapse. A brief flicker of something, pain, maybe, or shame, crossed his features before the mask of weary indifference settled back into place. His eyes slid away from the phone, away from me, fixing on a framed map of global shipping routes on the far wall. "Every family has its issues," he murmured, his voice thick. The sheer, staggering inadequacy of the statement almost made me laugh. It was the motto of his life, the mantra that allowed him to see nothing, to know nothing, to feel nothing. "Issues?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, yet it seemed to fill the vast, silent room. "To this extent, Dad, is this the kind of issue a family has?" He wouldn't look at the phone. He wouldn't look at me. He was a statue, a man determined to hold his pose until the danger passed. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thin file folder. I placed it on the desk next to the phone. "This is the annual financial summary for the Larkspur Hope Foundation from last year," I said. "The one submitted to the board for approval." I opened it to the last page. "That's your signature, right there, authorizing the year's expenditures." He glanced at it, a quick, dismissive flick of his eyes. Of course he had signed it. He signed whatever Sarah put in front of him. He was the chairman. His job was to provide the stamp of legitimacy, not to ask questions. "You authorized a $60,000 donor cultivation expense for a week in Scottsdale," I continued, my voice cold and methodical, the voice of an auditor. "On the same week, Rena posted photos from a spa resort in Scottsdale. You signed off on promotional outreach that was actually a down payment on a condominium in Miami. You signed off on the memo that converted $500,000 of corporate assets into a fraudulent tax write-off. You signed it all. Dad, you just didn't read it." He finally let out a long, slow breath, a sigh of profound, soul-deep exhaustion. He pushed himself off the desk and walked back to the window, turning his back on me, on the phone, on the incriminating documents. "I just want some peace, Lena," he said, his voice muffled by the thick glass. "That's all I've ever wanted. Your mother, it was so difficult. With Sarah, things are stable. The company is profitable. She handles things." He let Sarah handle things. He had outsourced his conscience, his responsibilities, his fatherhood, to her. He had traded it all for a quiet life in a handsome office with a view of the city. He had seen the bruises, the casual cruelties, the lies, and he had chosen to believe they were just issues. He had chosen peace over his own daughter. I walked back to the desk and picked up my phone, slipping it back into my pocket. The bruise vanished into the darkness. I left the file folder where it was, his signature exposed. "You'll have your peace," I said to his back. "Tomorrow, things will be peaceful, just in a different way." He didn't move. He didn't respond. I knew he wouldn't. I turned and walked out of the office, leaving the door open behind me. In the hallway, the air felt different, charged with the energy of the coming storm. As I passed one of the massive marble pillars that supported the atrium ceiling, I reached out and pressed my palm against its surface. It was shockingly cold. A deep, ancient cold that seemed to seep into my bones. The sensation was immediate and visceral. In that single, cold touch, I was thrown back 3 years. I could feel the rough polyester of my graduation gown, taste the faint tang of blood on my tongue, and hear the distant, triumphant beat of the marching band's drums. A promise made in a dorm room was about to be kept on the 27th floor. I didn't go home. I went to a quiet, 24-hour cafe downtown. I ordered a black coffee, opened my personal laptop, and logged into my secure email. I pulled up a draft I had prepared weeks ago. It was a formal notice, written in the precise, sterile language of corporate bylaws, calling for an emergency meeting of the shareholders of Larkspur Dynamics. It listed the time, the place, and the single item on the agenda: a motion to remove the current CEO and install an interim replacement pending a full independent forensic audit. The recipient list was every registered shareholder, from the largest institutional investors to the smallest legacy holders like George and his friends. My finger hovered over the send button. This was the final step, the last quiet move before the world turned loud. I thought of my father, standing alone in his office, choosing his comfortable peace over the ugly truth, and I clicked send. The email went out into the night. The subject line was just 2 words: bright noon. I closed my laptop, paid for my coffee, and walked out into the cool night air. I went home to my small, quiet apartment. I didn't stay up pacing. I didn't obsess over the possible outcomes. The machine was in motion. The pieces were all in place. For the first time in 3 years, my mind was completely, utterly quiet. I got into bed, turned off the light, and for the first time in months, I fell asleep instantly. The glass conference room on the 27th floor was flooded with the merciless, clarifying light of high noon. The sun poured through the panoramic windows, reflecting off the polished marble floor and the impossibly long mahogany table, making the entire space feel like the inside of a crystal. It was a room with no shadows, a place where everything was meant to be seen. The shareholders, board members, and senior executives sat in their leather chairs, a silent, expectant audience. At the head of the table, Sarah was a vision of power in a blood-red dress, a splash of defiant color in the sterile room. Beside her, my father looked like a man carved from gray stone, his face impassive, his eyes fixed on the blank projection screen. I sat near the back, a junior shareholder with a temporary contract, a footnote on the meeting's roster. The corporate secretary called the emergency meeting to order. The air was thick with a tension that the climate control system couldn't touch. Sarah rose to her feet, her movements fluid and confident. She was in her element, the queen in her court. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. Her speech was a masterclass in corporate rhetoric, a soaring symphony of buzzwords and veiled threats. "We are here today," she began, her voice resonating with warmth and steel, "because of a motion that, frankly, is an insult to the unprecedented success this company has achieved in the last 3 years. Under my leadership, Larkspur Dynamics has seen a 30% growth in revenue. We have expanded into new markets, secured vital contracts, and strengthened our community through the tireless work of our foundation." She paused, letting her words sink in. This success is built on a foundation of unity. It is built on loyalty, a family, and a company, is strongest when it presents a united front, when it refuses to be distracted by internal theatrics or the ambitions of those who have not yet earned their place. Her eyes swept the room, a silent command for allegiance. It was a magnificent performance. She was positioning me as a petulant child, and this meeting as a tiresome family squabble. When she finished, a smattering of polite, obligatory applause followed. The chairman, my father, was supposed to move to dismiss my motion, but before he could speak, I stood up. "Mr. Chairman," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the murmuring. "Under Article 7, Section 3 of the Corporate Bylaws, as the shareholder who called this meeting, I request the floor to present evidence pertinent to my motion." A ripple of surprise went through the room. This was not on the script. Sarah's smile tightened at the edges. My father looked at the company's lead counsel, who gave a minute, almost imperceptible nod. The bylaws were the bylaws. They were trapped by their own rules. "The floor is yours, Ms. Voss," my father said, his voice a dead, flat monotone. I didn't walk to the main podium. I walked to the small table where the corporate secretary, a prim, nervous woman named Ms. Albright, was managing the meeting's records. I placed a small black flash drive on the table in front of her. It was labeled with a single, neatly typed word: "Bright noon." "Ms. Albright," I said calmly, "please connect this drive to the room's audiovisual system. Display the contents of the folder labeled Exhibit A." "Ms." Albright looked at Sarah, then at my father, her hands trembling slightly. My father gave a stiff nod. She inserted the drive. The massive screen behind the head of the table flickered to life. The first image was not a chart or a graph. It was a grainy, time-stamped frame of video. "Exhibit A," I stated, my voice acting as the narrator for the silent images. "This is footage from a Braeburn municipal traffic camera, recorded at 3:17 a.m. on the morning of June 12th. It shows a truck belonging to a Larkspur contracted carrier leaving the Maple Yard Auxiliary Gate." I clicked the remote in my hand. The next slide is the official Larkspur shipping log for that same truck. As you can see, it was not officially scanned out of the main gate until 4:30 a.m., more than an hour after it had already left the property. The truck was operating off the books. A low murmur started to build. This was a procedural anomaly. Serious, but perhaps explainable. I gave them no time to rationalize it. Click. Exhibit B, an internal memo authorizing the conversion of corporate assets into a non-cash donation to the Larkspur Hope Foundation. The memo appeared on screen. And here's the metadata from the CEO's electronic signature. It was authorized at 8:47 p.m. on a Saturday. However, click, the screen split. On the right, a glossy photograph from the Braeburn Chronicle Society page appeared. It was Sarah, on stage at a gala, accepting an award. The caption included the date and time. At the moment of signing, CEO Sarah Keene was verifiably miles away from the device needed to authorize this transaction. The signature is a forgery. The murmuring stopped. The room became very, very still. Sarah's face was rigid. The lead counsel was now whispering furiously to his junior associate. Click. Exhibit C, a flowchart illustrating the subsequent movement of funds within the Larkspur Hope Foundation. A series of arrows and boxes appeared. Stark and brutal, money, originating from the fraudulent donation, flowed from the foundation's main account into a single corporate credit card. This card, assigned to the foundation's treasurer, Ms. Caroline Paris, was used to pay for. Click, a list appeared, itemized with dates and amounts. Spa treatments in Scottsdale, luxury retail purchases in Miami, a down payment on a condominium, the foundation, ladies and gentlemen, is a private slush fund. Someone gasped. My father's face was ashen. He looked not at the screen, but at his wife, a dawning, horrified understanding in his eyes. "And finally," I said, my voice dropping slightly, "Exhibit D." I didn't click. I simply nodded to Ms. Albright. She pressed a key on her laptop. There was no image this time, only sound. An audio file, crisp and clear, filled the silent, glass-walled room. It was Sarah's voice, a venomous, sibilant whisper, amplified to fill the space. "Without me, you are nothing." The recording ended. A profound, absolute silence descended upon the room. It was as if the air itself had been sucked out, leaving a perfect vacuum. Every person in that room, every executive, every shareholder, every lawyer, was frozen, staring at Sarah. The public mask of the benevolent CEO had been incinerated, leaving only the raw, ugly truth. Sarah's lead counsel, a man named Marcus Thorne, shot to his feet. "Mr. Chairman, I object. This is an outrageous, illegal." He was cut off by the sound of the main conference room doors opening. They hadn't been pushed open. They had been pulled open from the outside. 2 men and 1 woman entered. They were dressed in plain, conservative business suits, but they moved with a quiet, unmistakable authority that did not belong in a corporate boardroom. The woman stepped forward. "Sarah Keene?" she asked, her voice calm and professional. "My name is Agent Davies, Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation. We have a warrant to seize all financial records and electronic devices pertaining to the Larkspur Hope Foundation." The second man spoke, addressing the room. "I'm Investigator Miller, State Department of Labor. We are here to investigate allegations of wage theft and workplace intimidation." The carefully constructed world of Larkspur dynamics shattered in an instant. The room erupted into chaos. Lawyers were shouting. Executives were scrambling for their phones. Through it all, Sarah stood motionless at the head of the table, her face a mask of disbelief. I raised my voice, cutting through the noise. "Mr. Chairman?" I called out, my tone sharp and procedural. "Mr. Chairman, I must insist we proceed with the agenda. I hereby table the motion as written. A vote for the immediate, temporary removal of Sarah Keene from the position of Chief Executive Officer and the appointment of an independent, non-executive board member to serve as acting CEO until a full forensic audit can be completed." The room fell silent again, all eyes turning to my father. He looked broken, a man watching his kingdom and his life crumble around him. He looked at Sarah, then at me. His face was a canvas of regret. He picked up the small, ceremonial gavel from the block in front of him. "The motion is on the floor," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "A vote is called. All in favor?" My hand went up. George's hand went up. The other 2 legacy shareholders I had met in the parking lot raised theirs. My small block of shares, combined with their proxies, was enough. It was a clear majority. "The motion carries," my father said, his voice cracking. He brought the gavel down. The sound was not loud, just a sharp, definitive crack of wood against wood, but in that silent, sunlit room, it was as final as a gunshot. I looked at Sarah. The color had drained completely from her face, leaving it a stark, waxy white. She stared at me, her eyes wide with a horror that went beyond rage. It was the absolute, uncomprehending shock of a god who had just been informed that she was, in fact, mortal. The bright noon sun reflected off the glass wall behind her, and for a moment, her pale, empty face seemed to merge with the reflection, a ghost in the transparent prison she had built for herself. The chaos in the boardroom did not last long. The presence of federal agents has a way of imposing a cold, stark order on any situation. The shouting died down, replaced by the low, serious murmur of lawyers speaking to investigators and the quiet, methodical rustle of papers being collected. The shareholders and executives, once so confident, now seemed like ghosts at their own funeral, avoiding eye contact, their faces pale in the bright noon sun. I watched as Sarah was escorted from the table to a smaller, glass-walled office to wait with her counsel. She moved with a rigid, unnatural grace, her back ramrod straight, a queen being led from her throne room. The engine of the meeting had stopped, and now the grim procedural work of dismantling the wreckage had begun. I didn't stay to watch. I stepped out into the main corridor, the one that ran parallel to the boardroom, its outer wall a sheet of seamless glass overlooking the city. The silence out here was profound. I needed a moment, a single breath, before the next phase began. I heard the sharp, angry click of heels on the marble floor behind me. I didn't have to turn to know who it was. She must have asked for a moment alone with her lawyer, only to use it to find me. Sarah stopped a few feet away. Her face was a mask of pure, distilled hatred, devoid of the social graces she had worn like armor for her entire life. For the first time, I was seeing her completely unvarnished. She took a step toward me, her body thrumming with a rage that was almost visible, a heat shimmer in the air. As she moved, the tip of her stiletto heel, the weapon of 1,000 intimidating strides down 1,000 corporate hallways, slipped just a fraction of an inch on the polished stone. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible wobble, but it was everything. It was the crack in the foundation, the loss of her perfect, unshakable balance. She caught herself instantly, her body rigid. She leaned in, her voice a low, guttural whisper that was more dangerous than any shout. "You just killed your father," she hissed, the words dripping with venom. I looked at her, at the reflection of her contorted face and my own calm one in the glass beside us. I saw the city sprawling below, indifferent. "No," I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the stillness of the hall. "I just saved what was left of him." Her lips pulled back from her teeth in a snarl. She looked like she wanted to lunge at me, to finish what she started behind the gymnasium 3 years ago, but she couldn't. There were too many witnesses now. The whole world was watching. At the far end of the long corridor, a figure emerged from the shadows near the elevator bank. It was my father. He stood there, alone, a man untethered from the power that had defined him. He didn't approach us. He just stood, watching. His shoulders slumped. The light from the window caught the unnatural brightness in his eyes. They were wet with tears he would never allow himself to shed. He couldn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on the floor, on the patterns in the marble, on anything but the face of his daughter. I turned my back on Sarah, dismissing her as if she were nothing more than a bad memory. I walked the length of the hall toward him. Each step was deliberate, an echo of the walk I had taken across the graduation stage. When I reached him, I stopped. The silence between us was vast, filled with the ghosts of unspoken words and unforgivable choices. From my briefcase, I took out a long, folded piece of fabric. It was the ceremonial stole from my graduation, woven in the Westboro College colors of blue and silver. I had kept it in a box for 3 years, a relic from the day my war began. I unfolded it, near the bottom edge, where it had brushed against my gown. There was a faint, almost invisible smudge of dark red, a trace of my mother's old lipstick that I'd worn that day for luck. A ghost of a memory, stained on a symbol of a lie. I held it out to him. He didn't take it. He just stared at it, his throat working. "Smile," I said. The word hung in the air between us. It was the same word he had whispered to me for the camera, a command to perform, to maintain the facade, but my tone was different. It wasn't a command. It was a release, an absolution, an invitation for him to finally, after all these years, let the mask fall. A new figure appeared, slipping out of the boardroom, looking small and lost in the cavernous hallway. It was Rena. Her face was sheet white, her eyes wide with panic. She clutched her phone in a hand that was visibly shaking. She had seen the evidence. She had seen the expense reports from the foundation, the ones that paid for her photo shoots and her designer clothes. She had seen her own name, a recurring character in the story of the fraud. She looked from my father to me, her mouth opening and closing silently. "Rena," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "stop talking to our family's lawyers. Hire your own, a good one, and when the investigators ask you questions, you tell them the absolute truth. It's the only way you'll get through this." She flinched, as if my words were a physical blow, but then a flicker of understanding, of dawning reality, passed through her eyes. She gave a small, jerky nod, then turned and hurried away. A girl running from the ruins of her own perfect life. I looked back at my father. He finally raised his head, his gaze still not quite meeting mine, but he looked at the stole in my hands. And then he did something I had never seen him do before. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't the confident nod of the chairman of the board. It was a small, human gesture, a concession, an acknowledgement. In that moment, he wasn't the icon from the company portrait. He was just a man, old and tired and broken. From behind me, I heard the sound of movement. I turned. 2 of the IRS agents were escorting Sarah down the hall toward the executive elevator. Her personal lawyer trailed behind them, looking flustered and defeated. Sarah walked between them, her head held high, a final futile act of defiance. But as she passed the great glass wall, her reflection showed a woman who was utterly alone, a prisoner in a cage of her own making. They reached the elevator. The doors slid open with a soft, indifferent chime. She stepped inside, flanked by the agents. She turned, and for a final, fleeting second, her eyes locked with mine across the length of the corridor. There was no hatred left in them, only a vast, empty expanse of ruin. The doors slid shut. The polished steel reflected the hallway, empty where she had been. A small light above the door blinked, indicating the elevator's descent. Down, down, down. I stood there for a long moment, the graduation stole still in my hands. Then I turned back to my father. He hadn't moved. I gently placed the stole in his hands. His fingers closed around the soft fabric, a drowning man clutching a piece of wreckage. Then I turned and walked back toward the boardroom. The investigators and lawyers were still there, but the chaos had subsided. The acting CEO, a quiet, respected board member named Elizabeth Shaw, was already giving quiet instructions. Ms. Albright, the corporate secretary, was at her table, her hands still trembling slightly as she organized her papers. The official minutes of the emergency meeting were on top of a neat stack. They needed to be signed by the shareholder who had called the meeting to order. She held out a pen to me. I took it. The pen was heavy and cool in my hand. I bent over the table and signed my name on the line she indicated. Lena Voss. My hand was perfectly, absolutely steady. The aftermath of the vote was not a celebration. It was a triage. In the days that followed the emergency meeting, the 27th floor of Larkspur Dynamics became a command center for a team of forensic accountants, corporate lawyers, and federal investigators. The company was wounded, bleeding credibility and cash, and the first order of business was to stop the hemorrhage. The board. In its first official act, under the new acting CEO, Elizabeth Shaw, made a decision that was both pragmatic and deeply ironic. They temporarily appointed me to the newly created position of Director of Internal Controls. It wasn't a promotion to the executive suite. It was a deployment to the engine room. My job wasn't to lead. It was to clean. They were handing me the keys to every secret ledger, every hidden sub-account, every sealed file in the company. They were asking the person who had exposed the rot to now be the one to systematically cut it out. My first official act was not to fire anyone or to seek further retribution. It was to write a proposal. I drafted a charter for a new, independent charitable foundation. Its mission was simple: to provide verifiable, needs-based scholarships to students from Braeburn Falls and the surrounding counties. The charter included an ironclad provision. The foundation would be managed by an independent board of trustees, with no members of Larkspur's executive team or their families permitted to serve. Its finances would be subject to a mandatory, public, annual audit by one of the top 4 accounting firms in the country. I filed the incorporation papers myself. The name on the document was not the Hope Foundation or anything that echoed its predecessor's empty promises. I gave it a simple, functional name, and it did not bear the name Voss. My second act was to draft a letter to the shareholders. It was the antithesis of the kind of communication Sarah had mastered. There was no soaring rhetoric about loyalty, no glossy photos of the family. It was a stark, brutally honest assessment of the company's situation. It detailed the pending federal and state investigations, the removal of the previous CEO, and the immediate steps being taken to ensure corporate compliance. It ended with a simple, unequivocal promise: a new era of absolute transparency. It included a calendar of upcoming public disclosures, a schedule for rebuilding trust, one verifiable fact at a time. The message was clear: the age of secrets was over. That first week, I worked from the glass-walled boardroom, the site of my public humiliation and ultimate victory. I worked 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and a cold, clear sense of purpose. I directed the auditors, answered the investigators' questions, and unraveled the tangled web of deceit that had been woven into the very fabric of the company. At the end of that week, late on a Friday night, I was the last person left on the 27th floor. The city lights glittered below like a fallen constellation. In the quiet of the empty boardroom, I opened my personal laptop. I navigated to my secure cloud drive and looked at the two folders that had defined the last 3 years of my life. The first was named Quiet Ledger. The second, Bright Noon. I clicked on Quiet Ledger. Inside was the sprawling, chaotic archive of my secret war. Thousands of files, spreadsheets, audio clips, video snippets, annotated reports. It was the raw intelligence, the ammunition I had gathered in the dark. I stared at it for a long moment, this monument to my own pain and patience. Then, with a single, decisive click, I dragged the entire folder to the trash. I didn't hesitate. I clicked Empty Trash. A confirmation window popped up, asking if I was sure I wanted to permanently delete these items. The war was over. The ammunition had been spent. To keep it would be to live in the past, to define myself by the fight instead of the victory. The files dissolved into nothing. Their purpose served. Then I opened the Bright Noon folder. It contained only the final, curated evidence I had presented at the meeting. The clean, irrefutable proof. The exhibits, A through D. I went back to my computer's main drive and found one other file, the one I had saved before my quiet ledger ever began. It was the high-resolution photograph of my own bruised face, taken in the silence of my dorm room. I looked at the image of the young woman on the screen, her expression not of sadness or anger, but of cold, hard resolve. She was the one who had started all of this. She deserved to be here at the end. I dragged the photograph from my desktop and dropped it into the Bright Noon folder. It was the first and last piece of the story, the bookends of my revenge. Then, I right-clicked on the photograph's file, selected Properties, and checked the box marked Hidden. It wasn't for anyone else to see. It was my own private record, the cornerstone of the new foundation. I closed the laptop and stood up. I walked across the silent, cavernous room to the heavy glass doors that led to a narrow, protected balcony. The air outside was cool and clean, a welcome shock after the recycled atmosphere of the office. The wind whipped around the corners of the building, a low, mournful howl. It snapped at the row of flags on the roof, the American flag, the state flag, and the blue and silver banner of Larkspur Dynamics. They made a sound like cracking whips in the night. My phone, sitting on a table inside, began to vibrate. The screen lit up. The caller ID was a number I knew by heart, one I had deleted from my contacts but had never been able to forget. It was Sarah. She was out on bail, her world in ashes, and she was reaching for the one person she could still blame. She was reaching for me. I watched the phone vibrate, the screen pulsing with her name. I imagined her voice, the rage, the threats, the pathetic, desperate attempt to pull me back into the vortex of her drama. The ringing was an anchor, trying to drag me back into the past. I let it ring, and ring, and ring, until it finally fell silent and the screen went dark. My silence was the final answer. I would not give her the satisfaction of my anger, or my pity, or my attention. I would give her nothing. I picked up the phone. I opened my messages and selected my father's contact. My fingers moved quickly across the screen, typing out a single, short sentence. It was the only thing left to say to him. I chose peace, just like you wanted. I hit send. There would be no reply. We both knew it. I looked down from the balcony, 27 floors above the ground. The city was a river of light and movement. Headlights and taillights flowed along the streets and highways, a steady, indifferent current. People were heading home from late shifts, going out to bars, living their ordinary, complicated lives. Down there, nothing had changed. A titan of local industry had fallen. A family had been shattered. A woman's life had been irrevocably altered. But the city didn't care. The traffic flowed on. It was a humbling, freeing realization. My war, which had felt so all-consuming, so monumental, was just a tiny, forgotten battle in the grand, chaotic scheme of things. I stepped back inside and slid the heavy glass door shut. The sound of the wind was cut off instantly, replaced by the profound silence of the empty room. The bright lights of the boardroom reflected my image in the dark glass. I saw a woman standing tall, her expression calm, her eyes clear. It was my face, but the fear was gone. The end. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let me know. Let's connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey, please consider subscribing to the channel, liking this video, and hitting that hype button to help this story reach more listeners like you.